Hey everybody, Paul here with the incomparable Tom Golden from MenAreGood.com and the absolutely wonderful Janice Fiamingo of the Fiamingo Files. And this is regarding men where we hold men in high regard.
Oh, yes, we do.
We're going to talk about damseling, the damseling trope. And it is, boy, what a subject, because you could really just examine all sorts of facets of society and interpersonal relationships and see
Mhm.
that trope just popping up everywhere. Janice is going to be talking some about Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and that's like sort of a big picture damsel, sort of like Me Too is a big picture damsel. And then you get into interpersonal relationships, and I know you guys have never experienced this. She wants something, you don't want it, and all of a sudden one of these comes out and rolls down the face, and the next thing you know, you're like, okay. That is the damsel trope that red pill men learn to deal with a little bit differently than blue pill men. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because this could take any direction. So I'll just throw it out there to Tom and Janice. What are your guys' thoughts on how important is it to know about the damsel in distress and all the dynamics that go in behind it?
It is critical, and you got to know about it, and you got to know the details around it too. We know now that that tier that you talked about lowers men's testosterone. you know, so this damseling thing is biological too. It's literally lowering the man's testosterone, which makes him more liable then to ease into doing something for her. He's thinking about her instead of about his status.
Mm.
Anyway, there's all
That
kinds
is
of.
So you're saying
fascinating.
women's tears make men less competitive?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's yeah. Is there a particular study where that was determined? I mean, who would even think to study such a thing?
It's a good
It's
question.
it's amazing.
That's a good
Uh,
question. I don't
that
know, Janice. I can I'll look it up and I'll put the link to that study
that'd be neat.
in the low bar here so people will know
Hmm.
what it is. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. There's
It is
all kinds of stuff
fascinating.
about men's testosterone that we don't know.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. But this
yeah.
damseling thing is just every place you look, every
Hmm.
place. And I think there are biological components to it. Why? Because we know that testosterone is related to status. Men want to gain status. And who defines what status is? Hmm.
Hmm.
It be the women decide what the status is. And so they're determining the status, and he is then put in a position where he's biologically geared to want more status, so he wants more of what they want him to do. That's
Hmm.
damseling right there.
Hmm.
That's damseling. So I think
Yeah.
it's not, of course, biologic is not the whole thing, but it's a piece of it. It's a piece
Hmm.
of it. It's something we need to be aware of and to be concerned about, you know?
And it's obviously such an extremely powerful thing because I mean, it points to, from my perspective, my interest in feminism as a hugely significant cultural force. In feminism actually rests on the damsel in distress principle, even as it denies it. And you could do a
Huh.
whole, analysis of feminism, the successes of feminism, techniques that feminists use in order to make their claims in the public sphere, and you would find that even as women, most strenuously deny that they want male chivalry as a powerful norm in the society, even as they call that out as what they call benevolent sexism and claim that it is something that's very detrimental to gender equality, in particularly to women's aspirations to be respected as equals, etc. Even as they make all those claims, they're also heavily relying on the response of men to their performance of damseling being in distress, and they often do, and that's why I thought of this when I was watching Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's speech last week in the House of Congress. in which even while she claimed that she is a very strong woman, this is where she was talking about this Congressman Yoho, I forget his first name now, Ted, I think, Ted
Yep.
Yoho. She claimed that he had accosted her. That was her word.
Uh-oh.
That it sounded like a very brief. He called it a conversation. She said it wasn't a conversation. On the steps of Congress, and she claims that he shook his finger in her face and told her that she was dangerous and various other things. And then when he was leaving, supposedly in front of cameras, he said he called her pardon my language, a fucking bitch. And he I think to this day denies that he said that. He said that instead he called her policies and her ideas about poverty as the explanation for rioting and violence and crime. He claimed that he said that her policies were bullshit. But whatever he said, it was not. I mean, it was uncivil. Let's say that right up front. But it wasn't particularly violent. If you mutter under your breath in exasperation as you walk away, fucking bitch, I wouldn't say that that is actually an example of violence or even verbal violence, as Ocasio-Cortez went on to claim. But she got up and made this speech in the House of Congress saying that she was a very strong woman, that she was used to this sort of thing, that this had happened to her many times when she was working as a waitress. And so it wasn't that she was wounded by it, but at the same time, it was deeply, deeply insulting, not only to her, but to all women. And it must be atoned for, and it must be called out. And she grandstanded for 10 minutes talking about, what a serious thing it was. And then she called up a whole bunch of other congresswomen to talk about, she said that this was a pattern. It wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. She repeated that. And so she called up even though she couldn't bring forward any other examples of gendered violence that she had experienced in her short career as a congresswoman. But she called up all these other congresswomen who also said that they had been very badly treated, and all sorts of outrageous claims made about how difficult it is to be a woman in politics, supposedly because all men believe they can treat all women in a way that is both condescending and abusive, though condescension and abuse are actually sort of quite different sorts of attitudes and behaviors. But it was this deeply self-contradictory series of claims. She was particularly outraged that Ted Yoho said that because he loved his because he loved his wife and daughters, that he had learned to check his language and not to say things like fucking bitch. That was the rationale he gave for why he knew he hadn't called her that. And she was particularly offended by that, claiming that he had he was using the fact that he had a wife and daughters as a sort of shield for his bad behavior. But then she went on to say that she was the daughter of a father, and that she actually gave thanks that her father was dead and didn't have to hear, this thing, didn't have to hear about the horror of a congressman calling her this. I mean, I remember we talked once about, I forget what we called it now, pathological chivalry. The implication being that if her father was still alive and had heard that this thing had happened to his daughter, he would have had to go out and beat Ted Yoho, or something in revenge for the unforgivable slight to his daughter's honor. So she sort of took the man's own statement of chivalry, rejected it, called him out for it, but then performed her own chivalric number about herself as a damsel in distress whose father would be rolling in his grave if he knew that this had been said to her. It was truly, truly bizarre. And and as far as I could tell, I mean, I read tons of articles about it. And the vast majority, said that this was a very powerful moment. I think feminist speeches are always powerful, aren't they? It was a very powerful moment in the House of Congress. And as all these women stood up and talked about the terrible things they'd experienced in their careers, it was norm shattering. It was a teachable moment. And this is a woman whose closest friend in Congress, Tlaib, I forget her first name right now. One of the first things she said after being sworn in was to call Donald Trump, again, forgive my language, a motherfucker. That was perfectly fine. She said they were going to impeach the motherfucker.
Right.
That's okay, but that did not require an apology.
She's not a woman.
No men stood up to say that, that this was something they'd experienced for so many years and it had to be spoken of, and it was, deeply dispiriting and unsettling. But somehow, it's just amazing that, in 2020, a woman can still get away with this, and that the ridiculous contradictions of this stance. I mean, these are the two rules of feminism. One is that women are as good at men as everything, except in the cases where they're clearly better. And the second rule is that women are very strong, women are very courageous, women are very powerful, except in the instances when they say they're not and have to be treated with kid gloves. And these overt, ridiculous self-contradictions somehow continue to get a pass in the media, and many men rushed to say that that this was unacceptable behavior and that it was a terrible thing and they would not stand for such incivility. And it was all about women. I mean, if she had made a speech about civility, it would still have been totally hypocritical, considering the things people have said about Donald Trump over the last few years and not apologized for.
Just to say, look at the nature of her accusation. He called me a fucking bitch. I'm like, so?
I mean,
what is the big deal? I've been called a fucking bastard about 10,000 times in my life.
Yeah,
does she think, big deal.
Does she think politicians, male politicians, are never called, fucking assholes?
Yeah.
I mean, in an ideal world, politicians would not speak to one another in those ways. But okay, people lose it sometimes. Often they, deliberately are inflammatory in that way. She herself talked about running train on the progressive agenda, which is a very vulgar euphemism for gang banging, and never apologized or was called out for that. I mean, so the whole, if she wants to make this about civility, fine. I would still think it's totally hypocritical. But it was all about women. It was all about the supposed special abuse that women experience, and the special deference and the special respect and the special sensitivity that must be shown to women. Otherwise, the man is misogynist, even though calling somebody an effing bitch, it's not a misogynistic term really at all.
No, it's
especially when she is.
Especially when she is. I mean, again, but she's right in what she did about all this, because this is society's general reaction.
Yeah.
Society can look at a woman who is well-heeled enough and powerful enough to become a member of Congress, to become one of our governing members of our governance. Right. And she hears a bad word, and then everybody's having a fit. And even this guy's reaction, which was to say, well, I learned with my wife and daughter. I'm like, what the fuck? What do you even mean by that? You learned with your wife? And he's trying to defend himself by saying, I have a wife and daughter. I don't hate women, because he knows the weight of the accusation against him.
Right.
Yeah.
And he just happened to do it in a particularly lame way.
Yeah.
But this is how crazy the world gets over this stuff. And it just absolutely flabbergasted.
And you can tell it's happening because there's the sense that she's tied to the tracks. Mm-hmm. And the train is coming down the railway. It's like, that's what she was trying to portray. Oh, I'm tired of I'm such a victim. I'm such a victim of this terrible man, this train that's going to run me. He ran me over, you know?
Yeah.
Ugh.
And
And like,
that's why feminism would not have a dime were it not for the damsel in distress.
And that's why, as Janice
That's
said, it's got billions of dollars,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, God. Because
Because
look at the legislators.
because men are so gullible about this stuff. So
And
absolutely.
act
But
automatically.
yep.
Look at the legislators. What do? They act automatically in this damseling mode where they just feed it. They feed it. They see the train coming and they think, oh, I can't be the one who doesn't pay attention to the train. And
Yeah.
they all jump in. Oh, well, let's write a new bill that'll take care of women. Well, so what if men, get, that's a problem. Let's just take care of women. Oh, over and over again.
Well, and that your point, Paul, about the congressman's response. I mean, it is remarkable that he would feel the need to evoke his wife and daughters to say that that they as a result of having them in his life, that's why he can claim that he is not a misogynist and he does not call
Right.
women bad names.
Right.
As if without that, they tamed him.
He'd
They
be like other men.
civilized him.
Yep.
Yeah, and that if without them, he would be exactly as you say, Tom. He would be a brute like some other men, but he's not
All
because
other men.
yeah, and she actually went on then to say, I mean, it was remarkable after doing this whole thing about her father being dead. So he didn't have to hear this, but her mother was still alive and she had to hear it, and that was terrible. But then she actually went even further to say that the problem with Yoho's slur against her, which was a slur against all women, was that in denying that he'd said it, not taking full responsibility for it, not groveling and apologizing about it, he gave permission to other men to say it about his daughters. And so it was a really bizarre case in which she actually suggested that civility, and especially civility towards women, is something that men work out amongst themselves. That that it's entirely up to men and women play no role in it, essentially then saying that women are lesser beings and are not really a part of civil society in any way. I mean, it was truly remarkable. And of course, I mean, we know that a couple of years ago, I remember Kathy Young wrote about an extensive study that was done of Twitter insults and verbal abuse on Twitter, especially focusing on the experience of politicians on Twitter. And it found incontrovertibly that men in all political parties, but especially actually men in the Republican Party, received far more abuse on Twitter than women did.
Huh.
So it's just ridiculous to pretend that this is a women's issue and that it's something all men have to examine themselves for and apologize. And yet, all men or most men are not willing to go along with it. And so it is a fascinating question, like why is it? I mean, I guess it's social pressure.
The big G,
I was
isn't it?
going to say, it's the big G, gynocentrism.
Yeah.
Makes it flow in that direction, and it's automatic. It's just automatic.
I guess they know that it's career suicide not to.
Yep.
And this is the way you hopefully purchase exemption from being called a misogynist yourself and having your time in the limelight being hectored and accused and insulted by an outraged woman. So you have to immediately jump to the woman's defense.
I mean, just imagine a male politician trying to say that he was victimized by a female saying the same kind of thing. It would not fly. And it's because the fuel is not there.
No, it would be ludicrous. I mean, these women that came forward, like one of them, these were the worst stories they could think of. Okay. Some of them, one came forward. Oh yeah. This was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who I have to give her credit. she has been there, a lot longer than AOC. So, what she must have thought through her experience. What could she bring forward as evidence that this is a pattern of, verbal abuse, verbal violence against women? She didn't have much. She said, "Few women here watching have not felt a man's bullying breath or menacing finger in our face as we were told exactly what our place was at work." That's what she said. So that was,
Make that a fucking dumb bitch.
I mean, come on, bullying breath? I've never heard that
Bullying
phrase before.
Breath. I love
Even
the alliteration, but
So here we can hear the male politician say, "I've been a victim of her bullying breast."
Bullying breath. Yeah, breath.
Boop, boop, boop.
But and I was thinking, and it's true that AOC did mention, that he wagged his finger in her face. Well, then I sort of thought, I seem to remember, and I went back, and there's a video, lots of videos on YouTube. Remember Senator Flake, who was one of the Democrats.
We don't make these names up, though.
Yeah. I know, the poor man, and he was one of the Democrats who was thinking of voting in favor of Brett Kavanaugh.
That's a Republican.
Is he Republican?
I don't think so.
Oh, why did I think that he was
I think
Democrat?
He's Democrat.
Because I thought he was one of the few who. No, okay. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. He certainly.
He acts like a Democrat.
Certainly, he was one of the guys that they thought they could sway to vote against Brett Kavanaugh's nomination for the Supreme Court. Remember, he got in that elevator, and a couple of women cornered him and started ranting and ranting. I mean, it had nothing to do with anything. It was, I've been assaulted, and she was literally breathing on him. I mean, she got in his face. He was just standing there hoping desperately that the elevator door would close, but she was standing there, I think, preventing it from closing. And she was literally huffing in his face with her sob story and wagging her finger in his face. And he just had to stand there. It was a lot longer than what AOC endured from Yoho. It went on and on and on for at least 5 minutes. And he just had to stand there, shamefaced, looking down. And imagine if he tried to stand up and say, "I experienced verbal violence. And this was not only an assault on me, but an assault on all men." And as you say, it just wouldn't fly. It would be ludicrous. And so
imagine a world where a guy like that, and Flake at the time, would say, "Look, I'm not going to capitulate to emotional blackmail here for the cameras, back off."
Yeah. Well, that's it. He didn't, he didn't say a word. He looked ashamed. He looked.
Yes, he did. I remember it. He looked like a wilted flower in the corner of that elevator, holding his hat in his hands.
Yeah.
And Paul's right. Flake is a Republican.
Hey, man, I didn't want to rub it in.
Thanks for that. Yeah, but it's like, the difference, the inability of men. I mean, that was damseling in some way that those two women were doing to him, that somehow they would be harmed and all women would be harmed by his vote for Brett Kavanaugh. It's like it's a silver bullet. It seems as if it cannot be stood up to, and men have nothing in the emotional, psychological arsenal of male argument and male self-presentation that comes anywhere near close in terms of social power. It's startling.
And no one admits it.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to point out, too, that at the core of this model of a damsel in distress, which of course requires a knight in shining armor to come and face danger so that the damsel doesn't have to.
Right.
That's it. But the core of this operates on shame. For men, if they don't come to a woman's rescue, it is almost, I would argue, instinctive in men to feel deep shame about that if they see or hear a woman in distress, their impulse is to go fix the problem, to face danger. Yes. So that she doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that shame is like a 900-pound gorilla on the putting green. It's way too much impetus behind behavior for men to not stop and think. Guess what, guys? It is okay for you to take care of yourselves. It is okay to let women face consequences in life and to take care of themselves.
Yes.
It's really okay.
Yes.
And it's real important to remember that when you see the damsel routine being stuck in front of your safe, unhand that fair maiden or whatever, that is shaming you. It is trying to shame you. You know, AOC, as far as I'm concerned, she really is a fucking bitch. I mean, that's, just an opinion. And I'm sure that people have negative opinions about men across the board. We're not supposed to be rescued from people's differing opinions about us, even when they're critical. We're not supposed to be tidied up or have our lives wrapped up in a bundle so that nothing hard ever hits our butts.
Yep. So, Paul, that's the first thing that I think is important about what the red pill does to the damseling piece. And that is become aware of the situation. Become aware that, oops, I'm being pulled into this. And I think the second piece is learning to say no. Getting comfortable in saying no. And those two things, I think, are critical as far as red pill men learning how to deal with the damseling thing, because it is very powerful and it's automatic, and it will get caught up in the current, if we're not careful.
And I remember years back reading on the old Royce blog the concept of agree and amplify. And I've taken that with me a long time. It's a great idea.
Yes.
If a woman says to you, if you loved me, you would buy me a bigger diamond. I deserve a bigger diamond.
Yeah.
You say, yes, you do. And I'm not going to buy it.
Agree and amplify.
Agree and amplify.
Simple.
And put the onus back on her.
Yes.
Put the shame back on her. And of course, men do this to each other too. We set up damseling situations. Oh, this woman's been attacked. I mean, anytime you go out on the internet, there's memes about this everywhere, about white knights on the internet charging in on their stallion when they fear a woman has been offended. And they're absolute robots.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I was surprised how many men chimed in when I tweeted about the AOC thing to say that, well, she wouldn't have had to do any of this if there weren't these misogynists making these kinds of claims. What was misogynistic about that, particular statement? And what you were saying about other men being roped in, using the impetus of shame applies also in this situation, because there was another guy, a congressman from Texas, I think, Roger Williams, I believe his name was, and he was in the vicinity. I never quite understood, where he was exactly, but he also got into trouble, it seems, because he did not immediately jump in and take AOC's side against Yoho, and she tweeted about him, what a coward he was, because he just sort of stood back, and then he claimed he hadn't really heard what was said. Well, maybe he hadn't. Like, why? Like, what? Like, it was ridiculous. She
he heard it.
Yeah, that's what she said. That he lied, and I mean, it was just, it was stunning that even he then was kind of called on the carpet for not playing the part of the white knight to rescue this strong, brave woman from having a 20-second confrontation with somebody over a political issue.
Yeah. Powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's
and it has sent some men to past the brink of suicide. The accusations alone trigger that damsel in distress across the field, and people react. Family members turn on those who have been accused because they're reacting to damseling, and it turns out to isolate a lot of really bad you know, turns out to isolate in a very bad way.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think what we're pointing out too is that the whole damseling thing is a double-edged sword for men. You know, if they respond to the damseling, they're going to be screwed. If they don't respond, they're going to be
Yeah.
screwed.
Yeah.
So it's a very tough situation, you know, for men.
Yeah.
And women use this to their advantage, and no one calls them. You know, nobody says
No.
jack or diddly.
Well, I know
Mhm.
3 people who do.
I tell you, isn't that nice?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do. Yeah.
Indeed,
Mhm.
indeed.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about, and this is sort of taking things in a slightly different direction, but I have been struck, and I had meant to bring this up when we talked a couple weeks ago about the Central Park Karen incident, you know, with
Right,
Christian Cooper
right.
and her false charge against it. Well, it wasn't a charge, I guess, but the phone call she made where she claimed to be being attacked by
It was
an
a
African
charge.
American man, and
Yeah.
he had got that on video. And you know, since then, that was 2 months ago, but since then, you know, the videos of so-called Karens being you know, either caught on camera behaving badly or in Karen-like ways, or even in some ways it seems like being trapped by people, mostly men, I think, trying to get them to do a Karen. There's one famous case of a guy named forget his name, Dillard, I think his name was. He sent a woman into hysterics by claiming that he followed her in her car. He claimed she had cut him off in traffic and then given him the finger. He followed her home in his car and then started videoing her. He claimed that she had called him the N-word, and she went hysterical, and he kept videoing her for you know, minutes while she cried and cowered and screamed and covered her face and all that kind of thing. And there's been a lot of like really nasty attacks on, I think, primarily or even exclusively white women under the guise that these are Karens that we are now going to call out. So it's sort of interesting to me that there's this shift taking place where suddenly, although certainly in many instances, white women maintain the power to accuse men and to evoke that chivalric reaction. But in the cases of these Karens, there seems to be a kind of backlash building against them. And I was kind of like, I'm interested in, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that there's all this meanness being exercised on these women who themselves may never have actually, you know, been unfair to men or done anything, but certainly a certain type of woman has suddenly lost her power, at least in certain circumstances, to be able to claim male protection under the guise of being called out for her racism. So I thought it was just sort of interesting that we are watching a weird power shift, not a good one, I don't think. It doesn't mean I don't think that feminism is going to lose its hold on our society, that there's going to be a rethinking of the damsel's power in general. But it does show that these things are a little bit more fluid than I actually would have predicted
Yeah.
2 months
It's a
ago.
good point.
I've actually thought about that before, Janice, and what occurred to me is that I do think pretty much everybody with white skin has been so demonized for so long now that there's sort of a crack in the gynocentrism from that would allow this select group of white women
Mhm.
um,
Hmm.
to be attacked and demeaned,
Yeah.
and that sooner or later, I guess it could happen to anybody. I mean, I'd hate to think that kind of virulent racist attitude would be somehow a chink in the armor of gynocentrism,
Hmm.
but it appears to me that may be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean, it really is interesting to see like a lot of men anyway. I don't know their race often. I've just looked at things on Twitter, but a lot of men joining in very enthusiastically, pillaring these women, mocking them, laughing at their tears, enjoying the, you know, episodes of their humiliation and that sort of thing. And in many ways it does seem to, you know, at least in these particular, I guess, racially charged instances, it seems that gynocentrism isn't the predominant social factor that's operating anymore. So yeah, we're watching something of a cultural shift, I think, and not necessarily a good one. I don't think it's
I don't know. I'd really like to
it's,
see more and more false accusers go to jail.
well, that's for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
If that's a part of it, then I'm all applauding.
I'm definitely for false accusers being called out.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And I personally don't think it's going to hurt women at all to at least be able to mentally get the concept of what it's like
Absolutely.
on the other side of some bullshit pointed fingers at you,
Yeah.
and you're being powerless to do anything about it, as men are used to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
in
exactly.
That's for sure.
I think it might be some added humility, but I'm not going to go as far as to say that I really think it's a good turn. I don't think it's good.
Yeah.
Nobody should be subjected to that unfairly.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see how quickly mob rage can turn on targets that might have seemed pretty off limit for that kind of punitive attack. Yeah, that's what happens when you got a mob, I guess.
Oh, we got a lot of that going around these days.
Yeah, we've got a lot of that. Yeah. Anyway, AOC seems to be on top of the thing and is in no danger of having people turn against her at this point.
She's milking it.
Yeah, she's definitely milking it for all it's
She can
worth.
run the world, but she can't she can't take being called a name.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fine by me. Well, I guess that's another cheerful end to a wonderful discussion.
Indeed. Indeed. Damsels, damsels.
Damsels, yeah.
Just remember, when you see a guy shamed by a damsel, you always got to remember that men
are
good.
There we
Indeed
go.
They are. So we'll see you all. We're going to do a live stream next Thursday also, right?
Yep.
So we'll see you guys next Thursday. We hope we'll see you then. You all
Take care.
We'll see you.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.